Um, we're going to start a new series today. I've called the thing Overcomer. Now, let me tell you what I wrestled with. As I started putting this together, this word, this name, Overcomer, feels a little strange to me. So I'm just going to be brutally honest. Feels a little strange to me. Feels like perhaps we should be having some kind of like pep rally, if this is what we're going to talk about. It almost feels like it's a motivational type of speech or something. And that just, I don't know why, just that word, I think it's a great word. I think it's the right word for this series, what we want to talk about, but it just feels a little weird to me. So I thought, well, if it feels a little weird, let's do something, right? You want to go, let's do something a little weird. Let's do something a little different. Let's just pretend for a second that this series is a motivational series. Let's pretend that I'm going to be the guy that's going to run up and down the aisle and pump my arms, and you're going to be excited to be here, so you're going to get really loud in just a second, and I'm going to ask you a question, and a phrase is going to come up on the screen, and we're gonna say this phrase together. We're gonna read it with excitement in response to what I ask you, and you're going to do this really, really loud. And listen, I need you to do this because first of all, I don't want to feel bad about this whole thing, and second, if I decide to take this clip and use it as my motivational speaking tour tryout next week, then you're going to be part of helping me get there, right? So let's just pretend that this conversation is going to be just one of those motivational way out speaking. Maybe you've been to these things before. Let's pretend I'm Tony Robbins for just a second. And so I'm going to ask you this question. So how are we going to be overcomers together? Now put the slide on the screen, and here's what we're going to do. We're going to read this together. How are we going to be overcomers together? We're going to say it with me. Dream it, believe it, and build it. Boy, you guys do a good job. I'm impressed. I may take you on the road with me. Okay, you can drop that slide down. We're not going to do that. I wish it was that easy, honestly. I wish that we could just put some phrases on the screen and that it would be that simple. All we'd have to do is then follow it up with a Nike commercial, all get out and just do it, right? I mean, I just wish life was that easy, that it was that agreeable, that there were ways that we could just do this thing together and find that we didn't have any problems. But here's what I know. Here's what you know. You're sitting here today, and you probably have already had one of those days where it felt insurmountable. If you haven't had that day yet, it may be coming, maybe today, maybe later this afternoon, maybe this week, or it might be coming next year. But I definitely know that everybody in here is going to face something that's going to feel insurmountable at one point. It's going to feel like when you encounter it, it's going to knock all the wind out of your sails. It's going to zap all your energy. It's going to actually feel like you don't even want to go on. Chances are you've already experienced a day like that. Chances are you've already kind of encountered something like that where you know that it just feels almost like you're slipping into a state of depression. Like you just don't even want to get up and get out of bed. Like you just don't even want to live life. And that phrase, while it's a good phrase, while there's nothing wrong with motivational speaking, there's nothing wrong with some kind of quick, easy, pithy answers to motivate us. There's nothing wrong with that. It doesn't solve our problems, does it? It's maybe good for motivating the people on your workforce, maybe a sales team. It's good for motivating people to get things done. But when it comes to life every day, when it comes to some of the harder things we face, it doesn't exactly satisfy. And I know this is true. Listen, you know this is true as well. Because if it did satisfy, if it did work that easy, then we wouldn't see the level of discontentment, right, in our country and our culture the way we see it. We wouldn't see this desperate culture, this culture full of despair. We wouldn't experience despair like that if it was that easy. I'm going to start a conversation today, and I had 4 topics picked out, and we're going to see how we progress on these topics because I got to the end of this morning this week as I was prepping, and I thought, you know what, I may need to go further next week with this topic. So we're going to see where it goes, but here's the whole conversation. The conversation is we want to deal with some of the unhealthy views of ourselves that creep into our narrative on a weekly basis. And we want to do it with faith. So what does that look like? Today I want to talk about something that for me, if I'm brutally honest with you, for me, this is the area that I struggle with maybe the most at times. This is the one that for me, God's got to do the most work in my life. This is the one that for me, God's been working in my life. This area is, the area is a comparison. that sometimes a language, a narrative creeps into my mind where I start to compare myself to everybody and everybody else, everything else around me. I want to start by telling you a story because it's actually pertinent to this whole thing, and it's one that I probably have told some of you before. Back in the 90s, when I started seminary, I was a young, energetic husband, father, seminary student, just really wanted to do well, but also burning the candle at every end. And I sat in a class, a New Testament class, with one of my favorite professors. In fact, today he's the president of the seminary, and there were 250 plus people in this class. It was one of those classes. It was just a big class. It was one of the prerequisites for other things, and everybody was in there. And if so, everybody was. That meant you probably were an early student in the whole program, and so everybody was excited, and everybody was energetic, and everybody loved to do their assignments. And we would turn in assignments. And if you've ever been to college, or even some of the large classrooms we have in our school districts now, if you have 250 kids in a class, chances are the teacher, the professor, doesn't grade all of those papers, right? There's just no way. So you have teaching assistants or graduate assistants that would help grade these papers. And so we would turn assignments in. And one day we were anxious to get this assignment back, and I had a couple guys sitting on either side of me, and we'd become friends. And so we would talk about these assignments, and we would work sometimes even together, and we would write things. And we got the grades back, we got the papers back, and the guys on either side of me got A's, and I got a B. Now, my wife said yesterday, reminded me, I am not a good loser, okay? So something kind of happens to me, and I'm a little frustrated because when I look at the papers and I knew what they had written, I knew what I had written, I'm thinking we put the same thing in those papers. Like it was the same paper almost. Not that we copied, but we had the same content, we had some of the same information, and I was trying to figure out where my paper was missing. So I decided that maybe I'd been graded a little unfairly. So I took the paper and I wrote a little note on it. And I slipped it back to the professor at the end of class. You could drop things off. He would look at things. He had set that agreement up with the class, and I thought, that's good. He's going to look at it. He's going to see that, probably whoever graded my paper was just a little off that day, needed to be bumped on up to an A, and that all things would be good. I come back to class the next time, and actually, that's not true. We got our papers back through a campus mailbox. So a couple of days later, I go to my mailbox and I get the paper back. And it's got a nice little note written on it. It simply says, take the grade and stop looking at everybody else's work. That for me was the start of this ongoing understanding of how much I actually do compare myself to other people. And once you start, here's the thing, write this down. Here's the thing about comparison. Comparison is going to kill contentment. Comparison is going to suck the life out of you. Comparison is going to kill any chance of contentment you have in your life. Whether it's with your home, your car, your job, your skills, even your personality. Right? How many of you look at other people and you see their personalities and you think, man, if I could just be a little bit more like that person, how much more successful would I be? It's almost impossible to be content in life when you're comparing yourself. So you look at your home, and what do you think? You think, man, if I only had just a little bit more shiplap in this home, because thank you, Chip and JoJo, right? You look at your car, and you think, man, if I just had those really cool butt warmers, can I say that in here? Butt warmers in my seats, because it is Texas. We need those around here. If I look at my company, I think, man, if my company just had those suites down at the American Airlines Center so I could go watch the Stars play all season long. That was actually put in there for the elders. Or if like yesterday, I come across one of my old students who was in my youth group for 4 years in the 90s, and I come across him because he sent me an interview of him interviewing this really high caliber pastor in our country as he's traveling the world, no, literally the world, and speaking. And I'm thinking, what went wrong there? I'm staying in Allen this week. That's not bad. When you compare your life to somebody else, here's the thing, you're going to kill any chance of contentment you could ever have. And the problem is this, you know this, we're experts at comparison. Today, we are experts in comparing everything to everything around us. Maybe we're better at it than anybody else in the history of the world. I'm not sure it's what we want to be better at, but I think maybe we are. As I was thinking about the last 50 years, I started with going back to like the 70s. Anybody remember this thing called Life magazine? I think I've got a picture of one of them from January of 1970. Here's one of the covers of Life magazine. Now, I was just a kid, but I've still seen these things. They floated around almost through the 80s. And Life magazine was simply this. It was like a monthly magazine. These are printed paper magazines that come out. Some of you have never seen these. And they literally would have stories and pictures, and this was how we learned about things, right? This was even what we compared our lives to. But not long after the 70s, in fact, by 1980, you know what happens? We get cable TV 24/7. You can take the monkey off the screen. By 1980, we get 24/7 cable news. 1990, we get the World Wide Web. By 2004, we get Facebook. By 2010, we've got Instagram. So in 50 years, think about this for just a second. Let this really sink in. In 50 years, we went from following people through some pictures, maybe a couple pictures and an article, right, to invasive news stories with cameras following people around, to the ability to go online and begin to search specific people you wanted to look up and find out things that maybe not everybody else knew, to the ability to now begin to follow their posts and their story feeds, and follows posts and story feeds of people that maybe you would have never seen again because you don't even live in the same state anymore, but now you can follow them. To today, you can intimately follow people's pictures inside their home of celebrity stars or anybody, whether you know them or not. You can follow their lives. We've got the ability to compare ourselves to everybody in the world, and it kills contentment, especially, watch this, especially when you compare your whole life to somebody else's highlight. When you compare your whole life to somebody else's highlight, because when you get on Instagram, you see a picture of somebody's life in that moment from this past week. And it's the best of their week. It's the best of their life. But you know what you think it through? The lens you look at that picture through is this. The last month, your flat tire, the kids being sick, right? Maybe the layoff from your job, maybe missing deadlines, maybe the clogged sink or toilet. You see, you've got your whole life that becomes your lens, and you look at that Instagram picture, and all of a sudden you're only seeing the best of somebody's day or minute or hour. It's especially hard when we compare our whole lives to somebody else's highlight. In modern technology, I get it. Look, modern technology has caused a lot of this, but here's also what I know. Modern technology isn't the source of it. In fact, this has been going on for the history of mankind. And Paul would start to talk about this as he was writing some letters to the Corinthian church. And I want you to go to 2 Corinthians this morning, because I want to look at something Paul said. The verses are in your flyer. If you didn't bring a Bible, if you've got your phone, you can certainly look them up there. But the Apostle Paul starts to talk about this struggle, and you gotta understand his culture just a minute, okay? Because there are some things that were definitely different from our culture today and our struggles. The Corinthian church was, and I'm going to say this, you can laugh at it, but I tell you what, there's not a better phrase than this. The Corinthian church was a hot mess. That's just bottom line what they were. I love the Corinthian church. Every time I start to feel bad about the world we're living in, I think, go read about the Corinthian church. It was a wreck. They lived in a culture, and were trying to apply the principles of their faith to a culture that was a wreck. Okay, so Corinth is this little bitty town in Greece, and basically it's kind of a sliver of land, and it's like a port town. And on the west side, you've got the Adriatic Sea. On the east side, you've got the Aegean Sea, and they're kind of sandwiched in there, and Corinth is this little landmass in the middle. It became, and probably still is, a hub for culture. You had the Greek, the Roman, and the Oriental cultures all converged in this little strip of this port city. They had a big temple there. It's one that's well known in the world. It was the temple of Aphrodite. Aphrodite is the pagan goddess for sexuality and sensuality. So you can just imagine what kind of worship went on at this temple. In fact, if you can't imagine, let me fill in part of the gaps for you. There were reported to be over 1,000 temple prostitutes that worked at this temple. The Roman culture, when somebody in Roman culture was immoral or doing things they shouldn't, Romans would refer to their own people who were being immoral as Corinthians. That's just how bad the culture was. It was really loose and really free, and they had no boundaries, and that's the way they lived. It was Greece's version of Vegas, except everything you did there probably didn't stay there, right? Because it was a port city, and they were shipping everything out and in. So Paul writes this letter, and he says, let me talk to you about how to take your faith and begin to apply it, begin to live it out in this culture that you're living in. And part of what starts to happen is some false teachers come along with Paul. I mean, they're in Greece. Greece is known for its education. It's known for its philosophers. And so people were picking up this idea of Christianity, and they were looking at it, and new teachers would come on the scene. And one of the things that would happen in Greece, in that educational system, is if a new teacher came along and he was learning something, he would begin to compare himself to other teachers. It was part of their cycle. When he would do this, what he would do is he would compare himself, push this out for the people to hear, and his whole goal was to find one of the popular teachers and really come along and say, I've improved upon his teaching, so that he could kind of take over some of that teacher's followers. That's how they grew their own disciples. It was part of their culture. Well, Paul refuses to participate in this activity. He's like, I'm not getting involved in this thing. We're going to see why. But when you start to compare yourself, you've got to decide what the standard is you're comparing yourself to. Go to verse 12 of 2 Corinthians 10. Paul says this to these accusations that he doesn't want to compare himself. He says, not that we dare to classify or compare ourselves with some of these who are commending themselves. So we're not going to do that. We're not going to go out and compare ourselves like some of these other guys who are doing it, because they're comparing themselves, they're classifying themselves, they're kind of saying they're better than everybody else. Look, keep going. But when they measure themselves by one another and compare themselves with one another, they are without understanding. The New Living Translation says, how ignorant. I love that. He says, they're not understanding the gospel. When they start to compare themselves with themselves, he goes, they're missing the mark, they're missing the point, because comparison's not healthy, mostly because it'll steal contentment. But if you're a follower of Jesus, here's the thing, followers of Jesus are not the standard for each other. Followers of Jesus are not the standard for each other. So I'm not your standard, right? You're not my standard. See, so now we can all relax. You think, well, I brought some mess in here with me today. That's okay, because you're not my standard. And by the way, I brought mess in here today too, but I'm not your standard. Paul's already been talking to he actually in 1 Corinthians, he made a comment, was trying to teach them about this already. In chapter 11 of 1 Corinthians, he says, be imitators of me as I imitate Christ. He basically says, look, if you're going to follow me, if you're going to compare yourself to me, here's the thing. Don't do it with me. Understand that I'm following Jesus Christ. So when you follow me, you're really following Jesus Christ. So you can look to me as an example, but he's saying, don't follow me, follow Christ. If you're going to come after me, make sure you know that I am walking with Jesus. That's what he wants you to do. The imitation cannot just be because you think I'm doing things better. You don't know the ins and outs of my personal life. I don't know all the ins and outs of your personal life. What we cling together, our hope is in Jesus Christ. And that's what he's saying. Nobody's perfect in here. Everybody has sin in their lives of some kind. Paul says, so don't compare yourself to me unless you see Christ in me, and then make sure you're comparing yourself to Jesus, because ultimately that's who you compare yourself to. I want you to think about something. When you compare yourself to somebody else, or to anything really, you've given yourself two options. The first option is that you come out better than. You follow me? You come out better than. You come out superior to whatever it is you're comparing yourself. That's one option. That your performance is so good that you're better than whatever it is you're comparing yourself to. The other option is simply you come out less than. You come out inferior. Your performance is not good enough. When you go to compare yourself to anyone, anybody, anything, you've left yourself only two options. You're either better than or you're less than. And you know what's really weird about that? Is it works as long as I'm better than, right? As soon as I'm not better than, all of a sudden the standard I'm looking at is probably wrong, right? I mean, everybody all of a sudden starts to look for another standard or say that, well, I'm the standard. And before long, we've got a million standards in the world. Who do you compare yourself to then? Comparing yourself among others is only going to kill your ability to be content in this life. You're never going to measure up. And you're always going to have to look to create a new standard or to find a new standard to solve that thing in you that wants to compare. And Paul's saying, don't do it. In fact, if you want to compare yourself to anything, anybody, Paul says, go to the original standard. Go to the original source. Go to the person in whose image you were created. It's why in Genesis, it's why Moses wrote, when he was writing the first 5 books, he told the creation account, God instructed him to write and say, tell people, we, God, the Holy Trinity, God the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit created mankind in our image. We are the standard. God is the standard, not us. And we can be thankful. Listen, we can all be thankful. I don't have to be your standard now, and you don't have to be my standard. And now we can come together on equal footing and say, Jesus is our standard, so we can stop comparing ourselves amongst each other. Right? The freedom in that is massive. Now it's no longer about your performance. It's about this relationship with this person who created you. Every time you look outside your life, outside, to try to fill that hole of what's inside you, it's going to fall short. Unless you're looking at the person who created that hole to begin with inside of you. When you compare yourself with other people, you're going to kill that chance of contentment in your life. You're never going to be satisfied. Now, I want to do something. I'm going to wander now through a story. I want to take you to John for just a second because I want to show you when we read the Bible, so many times we read it and it just feels stale. It feels like it happened a long time ago. Like maybe there's things I can't really relate to. Anybody ever think that, well, I could never be like the disciples, that these guys were just better than everybody else, it's why they were disciples? That's just wrong. And not only is it wrong, it's in the Bible. Like you can see the progression of these guys, that they were not perfect. I want you to go to John chapter 20 for just a second. Here's what's happening. Jesus has gone to the cross. He was killed. He was put in the tomb. And 3 days later, he got up and he walked out of that tomb. The morning of the resurrection, Mary Magdalene goes to the grave, sees it empty, and then goes back to the disciples. Now follow the story because this is amazing. Maybe some things you've never seen with these disciples and how they dealt with each other and how they talked about each other. Verse 2 of chapter 20. So she, Mary Magdalene, ran and went to Simon Peter. Okay, there's one. Simon Peter and the other disciple. Who's the other disciple? Watch this. The one whom Jesus loved. This is, I told somebody this week, now that I know this and I've seen this for a few years, it sometimes gets a little irritating. Like, do you know somebody who will talk about themselves in the third person all the time? This is kind of John. John kind of goes, the other disciple. Who is it? Well, you know, the one that Jesus really loved. Oh, yeah, it's me. I mean, I'm not saying that his heart's wrong. I'm just saying, look, watch how he talks about himself. She ran, she went to Simon Peter and the other disciple. Which one? The one Jesus loved. And she said to them, they've taken the Lord out of the tomb. And we don't know where they've laid him. So Peter went out. Who did he go out with? The other disciple. Which disciple? The one Jesus loved. And they were going toward the tomb. Both of them were running together. Now, if you don't have two boys in your family You might need to go to the park this week. Just watch two men do something together, sports, whatever it is. There's a level of competition that just happens among men. I'm just saying it's natural, right, guys? Watch this. They went towards the tomb together. Verse 4. Both of them were running together. You kind of get the sense that maybe they started out walking and walking and walking and faster, and all of a sudden they took off into a run. And I get it. I'm reading it, but just walk with me for a second in this. But the other disciple, which one? The one Jesus loved, outran Peter. The other disciple, which one? The one that Jesus loved. He outran Peter, and he reached the tomb first. Verse 5, and stopping to look in, he saw the linen cloths lying there, but he did not go in. Then Simon Peter came. Like the slow disciple finally showed up. He gets there, following him, and he went into the tomb, and he saw the linen cloths lying there. And the face cloth, which had been on Jesus' head, was not lined with the linen cloths, but folded up in a place by itself. Let me just real quickly clarify here. When they bound Jesus' body, bound his head with a wrap, when he got up that morning, the body wrap stayed in its place. The face wrap was taken and neatly folded and set aside. That's an impossibility. Okay, if you know anything about embalming bodies and wrapping bodies, that's impossible. Okay, you can't. How do you suck a body out of there? So that's all that's happening. Is they're describing the impossibility of the moment right here. So verse 8. Then the other disciple, which one? The one that Jesus loved, who had reached the tomb first, not the one that Jesus loved. He loved Peter too, but the one he loved and the one that reached the tomb first, also went in, and he saw and he believed. Okay, we're going to fast forward a couple days. The disciples are now fishing on a boat. They're waiting on the instructions. They're trying to figure things out. And what do you do sometimes when you're in a waiting period? You fall back into what you know. Well, they were fishermen. So they go out and they decide to fish. And while they're fishing, Jesus comes again. Now he's walking on the shoreline. Verse 7 of chapter 21. That disciple, which one? Whom Jesus loved. Are you getting the repetition here? That disciple, which one? The one that Jesus loved. I started thinking about this, and I could imagine, and for some of us it feels like, well, but Jesus is God. Doesn't he love everyone? Yes, he does. But Jesus is fully God, and he's fully human. And let me ask you something. Do you have a friend that maybe you like just a little bit more than other people in your life? And it's not that you hate the other people, but you have one that you have some kind of an affinity towards. That's John. Jesus and John have this special relationship. That's why he can say that other disciple, the one that Jesus loved. I don't think he was being arrogant. It's just funny how it kind of comes out. He says that other disciple, Jesus loves all men. But Jesus was man, and he had this special friendship with John. Keep going. Therefore, that disciple whom Jesus loved, therefore said to Peter, it's the Lord. They're in a boat and they see him coming. Well, John knows him. They're buddies. They're close friends. He goes, it's the Lord. When Simon Peter heard it, this is the best part of the whole thing. When he heard it was the Lord, he put on his outer garment, for he had stripped for work, and threw himself into the sea. He was in his Speedo, because you don't fish in a boat with a big cloak on and a big robe that they were worn during that time. And he set that aside. But when he saw Jesus on the shoreline, craziest thing I've ever seen. He got fully dressed and threw himself into the water. This doesn't make sense unless you remember somewhere in the past that Peter had an encounter with Jesus one time, and he actually walked on water just a second. I'm not telling you that's what's going on. I'm just telling you, think about it. What grown man puts his full clothes on and throws himself into the water? It would be much easier to grab your clothes, tuck them under your arm, and swim to shore in your Speedo. It's just easier. And then follow this, verse 8. Verse 8. Then the other disciples came in the boat, dragging the net full of fish, for they were not far from land, about 100 yards. Anybody swim 100 yards in a full suit? He got fully dressed and threw himself into the water. If nothing else, was he not eager? He was eager to get back to Jesus. If you don't know the full story, a few weeks earlier during the trial, Peter's the one who denied Jesus 3 times before the rooster crowed. He was eager to get back to the Master. He was eager to go put himself in front of Jesus to see where their relationship was. I'm sure he felt a little guilt. He probably felt a little shame. He was out of sorts. But Peter he's just his personality. He's brash. He makes big decisions and big flamboyant gestures, and he jumps out of the boat with his clothes on. And he gets to the shore, and Jesus and him have a conversation. And Jesus starts asking him, Peter, do you love me? Peter says, yes, I love you. And 3 times Jesus will do this. And he'll finally tell Peter, he'll say, you're going to follow me, but here's the thing, your life's going to end not like you would want it to. He basically predicts that Peter's going to be martyred. That's their conversation. And Peter experiences grace and restoration as his friend and Savior, who he's denied 3 times, forgives him, washes away the shame, washes away the guilt, lets him back in. They've got relationship that's restored. Verse 20, Then Peter turned and he saw the disciple whom Jesus loved. He saw the other disciple following them. The one who had leaned back against him during the supper and had said, Lord, who is it that's going to betray you? Verse 21, and when Peter saw him, he said to Jesus, Lord, what about this man? What about my grave? What about my peace? What about my house? It's not as nice as everybody else's house. What about the struggles in my world where I struggle? It seems like everybody else struggles. What about my marriage? What about my kids? And Jesus said to him, if it is my will that he remain until I come, what is that to you? You follow me. You follow me. God didn't compare you to the others, to any other, when he created you for himself. When he created you and he put you on this earth and he gave you a role in a life, in a lane to run in, with some skills and some talents that may or may not be as good as everybody else's, it really doesn't matter. When he created you and he put you on this planet, he said, I just want you to do one thing. This is how easy this really is. And we get tripped up. We think the Christian life is hard. It's not hard. He says, I want you to do one thing. Stop looking at everybody else, and I want you to follow me. But they're not following you. I want you looking at them. I want you looking at me. But they're doing things, they're getting away with things that I can't get away with. I don't want you to worry about them. I want you to worry about me. He created you to run in a lane. He told Peter, he said, I've got this ministry for you. I got this thing I want you to do. And just follow me. You follow me, and the rest is going to be fine. It's all going to work out. Yeah, Jesus, but what about the other disciple? Listen, this is the thing we all do. This is the thing we're guilty of, is we look around and we look for the other. We keep comparing ourselves to the other. And it's stealing all ability to be content in this life. It's stealing our ability to have joy in this life. It's stealing our ability to follow Jesus in this life because we're so worried about everybody else and what we may or may not have. So a couple of questions. Things, you can either write this down or you can just sit for a second. But if you think that comparison, if you believe comparison really does kill contentment, and that God didn't create you, that He didn't compare you to others when He created you for Himself, then the question starts to become, how can I enjoy the blessings of God in my life if I'm being busy, being jealous of everybody else? How can I enjoy the blessings God's put in my life if I'm just busy being jealous of everybody else and what I see in their lives? How can I be the person God created me to be when I'm so busy wishing I could be somebody else? That's the question. I work so hard sometimes. I want you to leave with clarity, right? I want to have conversations, and I want clarity, and I want to help you, right? At Journey, we want to always help you take that next step with God. But the problem is so many times we don't sit with God enough and let Him do His work in us. And the questions are really hard that we have to wrestle with sometimes. And so here's the question. Are you comparing yourself to somebody else? Are you comparing your life to somebody else's life? Are you comparing your material possessions to somebody else's material possessions? Are you comparing your spouse, your family, your job, your car to somebody else's stuff? If you are, you will not grow in your relationship with God. It will hinder you. So it's important that you can answer the question, am I dealing with the things that I know I'm comparing myself to others? Am I letting God reveal that to me? Am I allowing Him to work it out of me? Because God didn't compare you to everybody else when He created you for Himself. And He's got a lane, He's got a place He wants you to go. And it may not be like my place, and it is certainly not going to be something like somebody else's, and that's okay. The question is, will you follow Him instead of comparing yourself to everybody else? We're going to come back to a piece of this again next week. Let me pray for us.